Welcome to the deep dive. We have a really fascinating and maybe a bit unusual journey for us today.
Definitely different.
One of you, the learner, shared an audio recording. It's called Gang Stalking Answers, Solutions and Honest Advice.mp3. It's by a Scott Snitzer from Buffalo, New York.
Right. And he identifies himself as a, quote, targeted individual. So this recording is, well, it's a very direct, kind of unfiltered look into his world, his perspective.
Exactly. It's not our usual, academic paper or historical text.
Not at all. But it gives us this unique chance to understand a viewpoint that, frankly, exists way outside the mainstream conversation.
Yeah. And our goal here isn't to, verify or debunk anything he says.
No, definitely not. It's more about exploring and trying to understand the speaker's reality as he presents it.
Precisely. So our mission in this deep dive, for you, the learner, is to pull out the core elements, his experiences, the specific language he uses, his criticisms, the advice he gives.
We want to give you a clear map of his perspective, really, without getting bogged down in, endless speculation or getting overwhelmed.
Okay, let's get into it then.
So right at the start, he identifies as a targeted individual, TI for short. He actually mentions the term itself might have come from intelligence agencies circulating in the online TI community.
Interesting. He also says where he is, Buffalo, New York, and that he's had this, what he calls open harassment tact going on for about 28 years.
Yeah, a long time. And because of that, he says he lives with no pretense of privacy. That's quite a statement.
It is. And he uses that term gang stalking to sort of frame these experiences. That seems to be the main concept he uses.
Right. And just for clarity, the learner, when he and others in these communities use gang stalking, it generally refers to experiences of, systematic harassment, surveillance, often by, they believe, multiple people coordinated together.
Okay. And what's his stated goal with this recording?
He says he wants to truly empower targets. That's his phrase. By making them aware of realities he thinks they might be missing.
Missing why?
Well, he points to a few things. The tactics used against them, what he refers to as mind control technology, and also complex PTSD. He really urges listeners to research CPTSD specifically.
And he presents himself as quite knowledgeable, doesn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He mentions spending, I think he said, tens of thousands of hours on research.
Wow.
Yeah. He says it stems from being isolated, but also just a love of knowledge connected to what he describes as his high-functioning autism.
So he's not just sharing anecdotes, he's framing it as analysis based on deep research.
Exactly. And he makes a point of saying, look, I'm sharing my personal stuff for teaching purposes, not to complain or be a victim. That distinction seems really important to him.
Okay. Then he kind of pivots, right? He starts critiquing activism within the TI community itself.
Yeah, pretty strongly. He basically says he thinks most of it is a waste of time, energy, and money.
That's quite a stance to take within that community, I'd imagine. Why does he think that?
Well, his argument is that fundamentally society is structured, by those in power to anticipate and essentially neutralize these kinds of issues anyway.
Oh.
Through existing structures. He mentions laws, diagnostic tools like the DSM-5, the way the news covers things or doesn't cover them, and how information is compartmentalized within big institutions.
He seems to see it as part of a much bigger picture.
Totally. He suggests that things like direct energy attacks, government stalking, harassment, the stuff TIs report aren't isolated. They're part of a wider pattern of people being mistreated in various ways by the system.
And he connects it all to global corruption.
Yeah, he posits that this whole program, as he sees it, is tied into corruption at a global level, which makes trying to expose it really, really hard.
Yeah.
And potentially dangerous.
So a very entrenched system he's describing. His skepticism, though, it doesn't just stop at, government or official channels.
No, it extends right into the media, both mainstream and alternative. He claims mainstream news actively covers this stuff up.
Okay, maybe not surprising given his perspective, but alternative media, too.
Yes. And this is interesting. He says many figures in alternative media are, quote, covered or just unreliable. He even names a few prominent names.
Right. And he goes further, suggesting news outlets just make things up, hoax stories.
He specifically brings up Myron May and Christopher Dorner, names often discussed in the TI community, sometimes seen as, potential TIs who fought back.
But he has a different take.
Very different take. He suggests they're actually still alive, and their stories were basically fabricated events, hoaxes.
That definitely goes against how some in the community view those figures, doesn't it? Like martyrs.
Exactly. He's very critical of that martyr narrative. He flat out calls them actors. It really shows you there isn't one single viewpoint, even within this specific group.
Okay, so if that's his view on the societal structures and media. What does he think is actually happening? Like the mechanisms behind it?
Right. He gets into technology. He talks about advanced tracking and surveillance tech, stuff he speculates might have been around for like 50 years already.
50 years, wow. And capable of what?
Influencing emotions, thoughts, moods. He believes it's quite sophisticated.
And he thinks this is widespread.
His premise seems to be that everyone has a file of some kind, that society is just geared towards control and information gathering on a massive scale.
So, given that belief in advanced tech, what's his advice? How should people respond?
Well, interestingly, he advises against trying to, outsmart the perpetrators.
Why?
Because he thinks they're using things like AI, maybe even quantum computers,
Yeah.
and getting real-time instructions through tech, like Bluetooth earpieces or something called Voice of Skull.
Voice of Skull, can you clarify that for the learner?
Sure. Voice of Skull, sometimes called V2K, is this hypothesized technology where sounds or voices are supposedly transmitted directly into a person's skull, bypassing the ears. So they hear it internally.
Okay. He also mentions radio frequencies, microwaves.
Yeah, RF and microwaves. He suggests these could be used to influence thoughts and emotions, too. These kinds of technological explanations pop up frequently in these discussions.
But then he shifts focus quite dramatically, doesn't he? Away from the external.
He really does. It's a major turn in his advice. He strongly urges listeners to stop focusing so much on the outside stuff, the perpetrators, the activism, and instead turn inward. Focus on internal well-being and what he calls deprogramming.
Deprogramming, what does he mean by that?
It seems to mean kind of unlearning conditioned responses, critically examining your own thoughts and beliefs, maybe undoing perceived manipulation or mind control influences.
But learn about gang stalking and gaslighting.
Yes, understand the concepts, he says, but don't let those terms define you. He sees that as potentially giving away power.
He's quite critical of what he calls the victim mindset.
Very. And also critical of relying too much on, say, TI community support calls or websites constantly. He thinks the really helpful information is often broader stuff about nutrition, general health, methods for that deprogramming or self-reflection.
Does he suggest connecting with others at all?
He does. He advises networking,
Yeah.
but specifically with rational targets, he says. But he also warns you'll probably encounter unreliable people too. Be discerning.
Does he recommend any specific resources?
He gives a shout out to one channel, Gang Stalking Manual Official, calls its advice fantastic.
Okay. But he also warns against some content.
Yeah, he cautions against stuff that's mainly about fear-mongering, even if it has some good advice mixed in. He thinks the negative emotional hit isn't worth it.
Right. So let's talk about the positive advice then. The self-care, the empowerment. What does he recommend specifically?
It's quite practical, actually. He really emphasizes nutrition, overall physical health, and actively, consciously working on deprogramming your brain. Well, he suggests getting to know yourself really, really well, like deeply understand your own baseline, so you can better recognize if thoughts or emotions feel external or manipulated.
Makes sense. Any specific practices?
He mentions meditation, looking into supplements, but cautiously, with research, journaling, and avoiding stimulants.
He also talks about diet quite a bit, right? Processed foods.
Yes, he specifically mentions processed foods and glyphosate, linking them to gut health issues, which he then connects to mental clarity. So a strong mind-body connection is central to his thinking.
And the core message there is?
That your mind is the strongest weapon. That's his quote. He believes improving your mental clarity naturally boosts physical health and self-esteem. It's about reclaiming your internal state.
Which leads him towards this idea of acceptance, it seems.
Yeah, that's a big part of his later advice.
Yeah.
He argues you need to accept the reality as he sees it. You know, the fascist technocracy, the corruption, the powerful forces accept it to be able to move forward despite it.
He tries to put it in perspective too, doesn't he? Saying TIs aren't uniquely suffering.
Right. He points out that, look, lots of injustices happen. Lots of people suffer without acknowledgement. It's an attempt to say, you're not alone in facing huge, unfair challenges.
And despite that harsh reality he paints, he encourages finding beauty, gratitude.
He does. Finding light, practicing gratitude, and, crucially, making a conscious choice not to define yourself solely as a targeted individual.
Why is that so important to him?
He seems to believe that identifying too strongly with that label, dwelling only on the negative, actually gives power to the perpetrators. It keeps you stuck in their narrative, so to speak.
Instead, he wants listeners to look at their own lives.
Exactly. Reflect on how you're spending your time, what regrets you might have, what really matters to you. It's a call for taking proactive control of your inner life and priorities, no matter what's happening externally.
Okay. So let's try and distill this for you, the learner. What are the key takeaways from his perspective?
Well, first, definitely question information critically. Be really discerning about your sources. Avoid stuff that just wastes time or ramps up fear.
Second, prioritize your own well-being massively.
Hmm.
Physical health, diet, exercise, sleep, mental clarity, things like meditation, that critical self-reflection or deprogramming, and building emotional resilience.
Third, develop a strong sense of self. Self-esteem that's internal, not dependent on what others do or say, including any alleged perpetrators.
And fourth, a big one, accept what you perhaps cannot change externally and focus your energy intensely on what you can influence: your own thoughts, your reactions, your actions, your internal state.
And maybe a final point. Cultivate awareness about how emotion and thoughts might be influenced or manipulated, whether by technology as he believes or just through conditioning. Be more critical of your own internal landscape.
So wrapping up this deep dive, we've journeyed through the perspective of Scott Smitzer, this self-identified, targeted individual based entirely on his audio recording.
We looked at his terms, like gang stalking, his views on activism, society, the media, the tech he believes is involved.
And particularly his strong emphasis on focusing inward on self-empowerment, self-care, and deprogramming.
And it's worth saying again, the learner, this has been an exploration of one person's interpretation, their personal narrative about these experiences.
Absolutely. His central message really boils down to a call for self-reliance and inner strength as the primary tools for navigating what he describes.
And given, the complex and sensitive nature of all this, we really encourage you, the learner, to consider everything we've discussed within the specific context of his personal story and stated beliefs.
Right. Which brings us to our final thought for you. Given this speaker's heavy focus on building internal strength, on self-reflection, on this idea of deprogramming, how could those principles maybe apply more broadly? How might we all use them to navigate the sheer volume of information, the different influences we encounter every day in the modern world, completely regardless of the specific claims in this recording?
Yeah, that's definitely something to think about.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.